I think we have everybody here. It's about 7:03, so I'll open up the December 1st meeting of the Hamilton Planning Board. I'm Brian Stein, the chair. Let's do a quick roll call of who's here. Let's see. Marnie.
Marnie Crouch here.
Dan.
Bill Wheaton here.
No. Dan.
Dan Ham here.
Rick.
Mitchell here.
Lori.
you here.
And Richard.
Richard Boroff here.
Great. Thank you. And Patrick, of course, as well.
Thank you. And Brian, I'd like to introduce Ann Schlecht. Ann's going to be assisting the planning board and several other town boards, committees, and groups in taking minutes. So happy to have Ann.
Yes.
And like to everybody give her a warm welcome.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ann.
Thank you.
Hi, Ann.
Very important task that's usually fairly thankless, but
And avoided by many.
yes, exactly. Exactly. No, thank you again.
Sure.
So on the agenda tonight, we've just got a few things. We have 59 and 63 Willow Street, the Hamilton Development Corp. And Tregorth Companies LLC would like to extend the site plan approval. It was good for 1 year, and we're basically at that point. So they're asking for an extension, which Dave can get into in a minute. We'll have a review and discussion of our flexible residential zoning bylaw that we've been talking about for a number of meetings, and then other board business minutes and so forth. So given that this extension request is partially by the HDC, both Rick and I will be recusing ourselves from the discussion, and Dan is going to run this portion of the meeting. So Brian Stein and I will recuse myself.
And Rick Mitchell recuses himself as well.
Okay, thanks, Brian. David, would you like to introduce yourself again?
Yeah, I said to Patrick that I don't mean to be a frequent flyer at your board meetings, but I appreciate it. So just real quick, Dave Tregorth, Tregorth Companies for 59 to 63 Willow Street. And probably should have, in retrospect, folded this into one of our previous meetings. So I appreciate the time tonight. But simply, this is to extend the special permit site plan, or I should say site plan review from December 17th, 2019, which would expire December 17th, 2020, in a couple of weeks for an additional year. And that's obviously, we just got our funding from, I think we're moving along on schedule. So, just got our funding from the state, continuing to complete the design now that we've gotten the necessary approvals here at previous meetings, and are excited to just keep moving forward. So this would allow us an additional year to pull the building permit. We'll hopefully need less than that, but that's what we're asking for tonight. So happy to take any questions or comments or anything like that.
Just a word, Dan.
Yep.
I wanted the board members to be reminded that our site plan approvals only last for a year if construction's not undertaken. So in that the project needed outside funding from other sources, as you would well imagine, you don't always have control of that. So that really precipitated extra time demands for the 5963 Willow project. So the long and short of it is, this is a simple request to extend that existing permit for another year.
Okay, great. Do we need to read this in, or can we just refer to the memo?
We need a motion with a vote, and it may also be useful to have the voting board members vote to have Dan Ham sign a certification of the board's vote that I can prepare in the next few days, so we can file that with the clerk.
Okay. So can I hear a motion from somebody on the board?
I move that the board grant the request, the joint request of the Hamilton Development Corporation and Willow Street Hamilton LLC to extend site plan approval and to authorize Dan Ham to execute any necessary documents.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Nope. So we have to do a roll call vote again?
Yes.
So Marnie,
Marnie Crouch, aye.
Corey,
Barbolia, aye.
Bill,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Richard Boroff,
Richard Boroff, aye.
and Dan Ham votes aye. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Can I
very
ask a-
much. We appreciate it.
Can I
Thank
ask a
you.
question about this? That doesn't bear on the voting, but just a general question here. Dave, from this point, how long will it be before the project do you expect to be completed? And this is not something I'm going to hold you to. This is just for general information.
Completed as in construction completed?
Sure.
We think construction's about 12 months.
Okay.
And I am very much hoping to start in the spring.
Okay.
So we're full speed ahead with that goal in mind. That being said, there's some things that, there's things that can get in the way of that, but that's what we're used to and overcoming them. But we're having great discussions right now with lenders. Now that we have the awards, that really kicks off a lot of the discussions with lenders and our Healthy Neighborhoods Equity Fund to really, tighten everything up and get ready for a closing.
Very good.
So we'll get commitments from them in the coming, month or two. And then that'll really establish a clearer closing timeline. So that's what we're up to right now, full speed ahead. And then, once we'll close 12 months from there, we'll be
Yeah, right.
opening.
So if it takes 12 months to get to that point, then it's next spring. And then from spring and summer, you get the shell built and do the internal work in the fall and winter.
That's right. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So, a lot of the site work, hopefully when it's really muddy outside,
Mhm.
is ideal. And then you're coming out of the ground right as the weather's starting to turn, so that, by the time the cold weather comes in the fall, you're weather tight, well in time to be working inside essentially over the winter months. And then ideally, you're offering brand new, beautiful units in the spring when everyone's feeling good again.
Very
Wanted
good.
to move and COVID's passed us. And
Yeah.
so
Okay, great. Thank you.
we'll keep you guys up to date though, as we go. All right.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. You all have a great night.
So,
Bye-bye.
Too.
Aye.
all yours, Brian.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. So moving on to our flexible zoning bylaw, we have Patrick sent out a, the latest draft that Marty is so kindly put together of the text. And then we just got an updated matrix from Bill yesterday, I think. So Bill, can you just briefly walk us through that and kind of just explain things and how, because we had asked, or I had asked and Patrick to have Bill put the matrix into a similar format as to the senior housing matrix, while still allowing the what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of the accumulative averages or accumulative percentages of set asides that he had come up with over the last few meetings. But again, working that into a readable format for the majority of people. So that's kind of where we're at. So Bill, could you just kind of walk us through what we've done? And I think
And this is actually directly copied off of the columns. Are a little different labels and stuff, but the format is copied directly off of the senior housing bylaw, where you start off in column B with a base housing density that you allow when somebody participates in this program. And you can see that's an extra unit and a half per acre, depending on which zoning category you're talking about. And then there's 3 columns for which you can increase those. Let's forget the business district for a minute, for which you can increase the 321 base flexible housing densities by 25%, 25%, and then anywhere from 0 to 99%. This is the thing that's different. So in column F, what happens is the percentage increase in density you get varies continuously with how much land you're setting aside for public use. So if you're setting aside 50%, then the number in column F is, 50%. If you're setting aside 20%, it's 0.2. Theoretically, you could set aside 100%, but then you wouldn't have any land for development. So just to keep the thing kind of, bounded, I said, well, you could set aside 99%. We could put a cap on this if you want.
Yeah.
You can't set aside more than 75% or something like that. But then you take that percentage and you add it to the percentages in column C and E, if that's what the developer chooses. Okay, and then you take those cumulative percentages, add them to 1, and multiply them by the base density in B. It's exactly the same as what you do in senior with those percentages. And that gets you a range of allowable density, which has, for example, in R1A, that ranges from 3. You get 3 if you don't do anything that we want you to do. All you do is you come in the base program with 3 units, and that's what you get. On the other hand, the middle number is you don't do any set-asides, but you build 50% smaller units, and you follow the smart growth thing, so that gets you another 50%. So then you could build 4.5 units. And in the advent, you do all of that, and you set aside virtually everything, then you could get 5.99. Again, that's just a mathematical thing. Now, here's the really big difference. I want to charge for this. I want to follow Tom Ford's exact suggestion, which is you give developers density bonus here. Then depending on what they do in R1A, they're going from 2, which is allowed by statute. Okay, all the way up to 3, 4.5, or as high as 6. So you're giving them a really significant increase in density, and in exchange, what the town wants from them is a contribution to the open space fund. So what you do is you say, all right, the difference between what you're getting under this program, which is column G, okay, minus what you're, allowed by law, which is column A, that's the extra density we're giving you. And for that, we would like a contribution of $50,000 per extra unit, which is actually a, pretty cheap price per lot, but that's basically what you're doing per unit, a land contribution per unit. And then, so how much the developer winds up paying in J into the open space fund can vary a lot depending on which zoning category you're at and how much, bonus density he's actually getting relative to what's allowed by law under A. And so the way to think about it here is you're charging the developer for extra density, 50,000 per unit. And presumably he's also making more money now that he can build at extra density. So he has to weigh those two. And how much bonus you give him depends on what kind of goals he's meeting. How much land is he setting aside? What's the mix of smaller units? Is he following smart growth? Those things.
So even though let's say he does all three in CE and F, and whatever percentage it is in F, doesn't really matter. So he's doing all that, quote unquote, extra, but you're still charging him 50,000 a unit that he gets from doing that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So how can he make a profit with all of this add-on?
Well, because he's taking a fixed piece of land and he's putting 6 units per acre on it. Each unit has a profit, as opposed to putting 2 units or 1 unit or 3 units, depending whatever the base density is. So that's a heck of a lot more profit. And what we're charging him is 50K for each one of those extra units, which
Extra units.
by
only.
my rough and ready calculus is less than the extra profit.
Say that again?
By my gut instinct, that's less than the extra profit. So he would find this usable. I mean, it's not going to be as profitable as if we don't charge him anything.
Right, I get
Then
that.
all we're getting, he's getting, this huge increase in density for just building a couple smaller units or making them more energy efficient or setting aside some amount of land. That's a giveaway. And Tom Ford said that. Tom said, the other thing to say is if he doesn't do any of those things, he can still buy extra density. He can still go from column A to column B for $50,000 a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. So
That's what Tom actually suggested. He said, he would probably want to build what he wants to build because that's where he gets the most profit. But he would love to have extra density, and he'd be willing to pay something for that in terms of a contribution into the open space fund, which is what we're allowing him to do.
So my question is, why did you start in column B? It's different than your original matrix.
I just followed the
Right, you just went by the senior housing.
Senior housing bylaw, right? They got the same increases. Their A to B difference is the same as this is.
So
consistent.
question, could a developer potentially skip CE and F and just jump to I? Or I think that's I.
Well, what he would, if he skipped C, E, and F, he would move from the density in A to the density in B, and he'd be paying 50K per extra unit.
Yeah.
And then he would build whatever he wanted to build.
So that really kind of subverts the intent of having the other incentives, because it's like, well, I don't want to build smaller units. I want big units, a higher profit margin, so I'll easily pay that 50K.
Yeah, but if he builds the smaller units, he gets to build more of the smaller units than he does of the bigger units. And remember, he's making a profit on each unit.
Yeah, I have a problem with that. He could get the extra units using CE and F, and he wants to buy extra after that, then 50K might make sense. But you can't hopscotch over those, because those are the things that we're saying were important.
But that's exactly what the one developer we interviewed suggested he thinks we ought to do, which is let him pay, because we said we would like to encourage density. And he said, okay, make me pay for it. Make a contribution into the open space fund.
Who said that, Bill?
Tom Ford.
Oh, Tom.
Well,
Okay.
yeah. Well, Tom Ford is not constructing this bylaw. So
Oh, I know that, but we had talked about getting
No,
some
I get it. I
feedback
get it.
from developers.
I get it. We had actually said $100,000, you get an extra unit. You cut it down to 50, and then you've eliminated the water efficiency and
Well, I wasn't quite sure what the smart growth.
well, smart growth was in the all the topic of conversation 15 years ago when we passed the senior housing bylaw. It's it's now passe because these have actually been built into pretty much existing building standards and development. The only smart growth component really would be building next to a transit, near transit. So that really is kind of an anachronism now. So that ought to be, I think that ought to be taken out. And the other
Well,
one,
I'd be happy to exchange efficiency if we think that's what we really want to do. I'm just using the items that we had
Yep,
in the,
got it.
right?
The other-
I'm not, this isn't set in stone, so we could put energy efficiency in there. I'm not, I
The
don't
other
know.
one I have a concern about was the public access and connection to an improvement of adjoining trails. That seems to have gotten missed as well.
No, that's actually part of column F. Okay, the land that is set aside has to be open and not developable.
No, that's not what I'm saying. The component that was originally talked about was having, if they granted public access and they can, and or connected and or improved trails that were existing on the property or didn't exist, but built them to connect to existing trails, they would get a bonus.
Well, but it's the problem is a lot of development may not be near an existing set of trails, and we would want to still encourage the developer to set aside the land. I think it's more important that we say you set aside the land, the public has some access to it of some sort, and that where there are trails abutting it, they connect. I mean, we can refine this, but I would say just setting aside land so that the owners of the land have their own private park. That doesn't do us any good. We want this park to be, with this open land to be, accessible by
I
the
don't think
public.
that's what Rick is saying.
That's the whole point of that.
Then we can modify that column a little. Yeah.
Well,
No,
okay.
I
I
think
mean, this is a draft. I just said open and not developable. We can say open, usable, connectable,
Okay.
yeah,
So-
I don't think you want to restrict that column to say you have to connect trails when there may not be trails to connect.
Well, yeah, you have to be
Nobody's-
careful. You have to say, where possible, or yeah.
Yeah.
We're not restricting it. We're just saying if it is possible,
Well, yeah.
they can get a bonus for doing so.
Well, right. But my point is that if there aren't trails to connect and you're setting aside, say 50%, whatever it is, there aren't trails immediately there adjacent, we can still give them the bonus.
Yes, and we should. That would be the idea.
If there are, great. But if there aren't, then what's the point?
We had a separate category for trails,
Right.
and I think that category would not necessarily be used very often.
Right.
But I think it's important to have that as a separate category. And I'm thinking of the Peary property because it used to be possible to go from the Pingree Woods or the Devon Glen property, cross Route 1A and go through the Peary property over to Bridge Street in the schooling field or over to Gathering Farm. And when the Peary property was sold, that trail or the access through the Peary property was curtailed.
Was that a
So
horse trail or walking trail or both?
Doesn't matter. But
both went through the Peary property, and that's
Right.
gone now. So that's really kind of
Right.
bisected the trail systems on either side of town.
that wasn't a special permit though.
No, but I'm just saying it's helpful to have that as a separate category. And again, I have the trail maps for Hamilton, the equestrian trail maps in particular. So I don't really think it would be used very often, but if it were used, I think it should be encouraged and given some extra density bonus because it does preserve, the character of the town and, of course, the myopia.
I mean, I am.
Equestrian tradition is really integral in our marketing here in Hamilton.
I
And that was
imagine
in
that
Rick's original
where
proposal.
One at a
I
time.
imagine that if the development does have as Brian said, abutting trails, that they will want to connect them. I mean, if they're going to open it to the public, they'll do that. But we don't want to say you have a nice piece of land here, but it doesn't connect
No,
to
we're
any
not saying that.
trails. And
We're not
so,
saying that.
Oh,
We're not
yeah,
saying
yeah.
that.
you know,
We're
we're not going to give you a bonus.
Could
That's-
I ask for a clarification because I'm confused. So if the incentives were not utilized, is it possible for the developer to simply buy density with
Yes.
$50,000?
He can, in this case, he can buy the base flexible density in B relative to A. He could buy part of that, I guess. All or part of it.
Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, you're saying he has to buy it to get that density. From
Yes, he has to buy column B.
Yeah.
He can't get into this program without paying something.
Right.
He can't get
Oh,
the units
wow.
for free.
This is really getting convoluted. I thought it was if they wanted extra density, they could buy extra density irrespective of the other incentives in CEF.
No.
Well, they can. They can't buy an infinite amount of density, but they can go from A to B without ever indulging in C, E, and F and pay 50,000 an extra unit to do that.
Yeah, yeah. See, and that's where I have a problem because you're skipping. They're basically saying, screw the rest of those. I don't want those. It's going to be more expensive. The cheapest route for me is to spend $50,000 to get the density. It seems awfully low.
But it's only to column B. You can't get any more density than that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You
Okay.
can't go to 8 or 10 or 12 or
Right.
no.
You can't say, okay, I'm going to start in B. I'm going to pay my 50,000 for an extra unit, and then I want to go to max out G and pay for that. You can't do that. Is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Only go up to B.
Again, it's a bit convoluted.
No, it's cumulative. It works
it's gonna
just
be-
like it works
No, I
just
get it. I
like
get it. I
the
get it.
senior
I get it.
housing bylaw.
I get it. It's going to be hard.
Actually, it doesn't, because, the one thing about the senior housing bylaw is I am able to read that matrix and understand it. And sadly, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, so then what is column J? What does column J do?
The last two columns simply say how much the developer winds up paying. They don't really relate to what he can do. It's depending on what he decides to do. He's always paying $50,000 for an extra unit. And depending on how he decides between C, E, F, okay, and what the
Well, let's
total is-
assume he doesn't do C, E, and F. Take that out of the equation.
I don't think you need J, period. I think we can take that out.
Well,
Right.
what
No, I
is
know that.
J?
I put that in there. It doesn't need to go. I put that in there to illustrate what the developer would wind up paying. The first number in J is what he'd wind up paying if he skipped C, E, and F. And the last number is what he'd wind up paying if he did the maximum in G.
Again, it's too convoluted. I like the original one where we just said you get an extra unit if you pay 100,000. Now it doesn't have to be 100,000. It could be 50. It could be 75. It could be 500,000.
That's exactly what this does, but it adds other factors into it.
Well, no, because in order to get to the base density of, look at the zone B, to get to 4 units, you got to pay $200,000 just to start this conversation.
Well, but part of the problem is no, you don't. You have to, what's the residential zoning allowed in B now? Is any?
Yeah.
What is it? I didn't know, so that's why I put the 200,000. What is I couldn't find it in the bylaw, what the residential density is in B.
Well, you got to define what type of residential.
Well,
It's like we got to do Willow Street in the residential district. So
That's a business district, but it's
right.
It's
I'm sorry, I meant business.
multi-family, allowed use.
Right.
Well, then these numbers would have to change because I just didn't know what the
Okay, well,
maximum
let's get out,
density
let's,
is.
okay, let's get out of B. Let's go to R1A. He's
Right.
going to pay $150,000 just to get the base density.
No,
No?
he pays $50,000 to get the extra unit 3 versus 2.
Right.
And
Okay,
in R1B,
Per unit.
he pays $50,000 to get 2 units relative to 1.
yeah,
And in
again,
RA, to get to 1 from a half, you have to really think of this as 2 units. He pays $25,000 per acre, but since the minimum lot is 2, that's $50,000 for the extra unit.
yeah, again, it's, and this is just me, Mr. Simple Brain. This is, it's a, you've got a chess game going on here. The average person looking at this would have a real hard time understanding what it is that you're doing here. So that's mine. So that I have a real problem with. And then
Well, maybe I should just skip J. You just follow column I. It just says the fee you pay per extra allowed unit, which is column G minus A.
I mean, I get why you're doing this. It just is.
Is it the range that's confusing? Because that might be confusing because column F, the percentage goes from 0 to close to 100.
I
Well-
think the problem is not leave out column J or column I. It's just plain too confusing, the whole thing. I find it very confusing.
So the other issue I have is it's extremely biased against density in the RA district. And that's where most of the land is going to be available for development.
Well, not in percentage terms. I mean, come on, you have to admit putting 5 units per acre on, in the middle of a 2-acre subdivision is very different than putting 5 units per acre in the middle of an area where it's 1/4 acre lots or something like that. I mean, it stands out like a sore thumb. It's very different.
Okay, let me see if I understand this, because I'm looking at the RA district, column G. The maximum they could be building, the way I'm reading this, and I may be misunderstanding, is 2.5 units.
Yes, that is if they set aside a ton of land for open space and they build small units and meet the criteria of column E, right?
Well, right
So that's
now,
a 5-fold increase,
right.
5-fold increase in density.
And, well, right now, under the senior housing bylaw, they can build 4 units per acre. So we're going backwards. This is so biased to dump density in the business district, in the R1A district, and leave the RA basically untouched is just untenable.
You have to think about this in percentage, Rick, not absolute. So in the R1A, you could go from 2 to 6 units. That's a 3-fold increase. Okay, in the RA, you can go from 0.5 to 2.5. That's a 5-fold increase. So I don't think it's fair to say we're letting the RA guys off easy.
Wait a minute, now I'm really even more confused, because in the R1B column A, the base density is 2 if they pay for it. And
No,
then,
the base density is 1, the legal is 1, and
right,
they
but
can
the,
go to 4.
If-
3.9.
well, wait, let me see if I understand it. But they've got to pay 50,000 to get to 2 under your column B, right?
Mhm.
Okay, and then they use the other incentives in C, E, and F, and the maximum they can get is
Is
3.9, all right,
3.99.
4 units per acre. So that's
Right.
what they can already do that under the senior housing bylaw if they could find that in the R1B district. Then we go to the RA. If they pay $50,000, they get they get 1 unit base density. And if they use all the incentives in C, E, and F, the maximum they can build per acre is 2.5.
Right.
Again, that's ridiculous. It's
Why is it
absolutely
ridiculous?
obscene. Right
Why is
now,
it
under the
ridiculous?
senior house, no,
Why is
under
it ridiculous, Rick?
the senior housing bylaw, they can build 4 now.
Well, they're supplying housing to seniors. This is a different program.
No,
They're
no, no,
still
no.
getting a huge increase
Getting
in
nothing.
density.
They're getting nothing. This is like absurd.
What it basically
No,
does.
it's
is
not nothing. It's just less than
to
senior
build
housing.
in the RA.
The whole point is to preserve open space
Right.
and build cluster housing to protect open space and provide revenue to the town. 2.5 units per acre under a flexible density bylaw is not going to do that. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
No,
but you have a whole bunch of people.
That's a different argument. That's a different argument. I agree with you on that, right? But I also agree with Bill that it is you're by factors you're increasing RA more than any of the other zones. Those two statements are true, right? But which one, is going to weigh more?
Well, again, I'm looking at the practicality of this is, first of all, for me, again, Mr. Simpleton, it's very confusing. It's very difficult to read. That's my number one. My number two is I'm looking at parity with an existing bylaw, and I'm looking at parity with how zoning districts are dealt with. And I see that there's a significant reduction in density that's possible in the RA district under this bylaw. And I think it's picking winners and losers. And if I'm a typical person trying to understand this, they're going to be going, well, this doesn't look like, it looks like the business district could get a lot more density as would R1A and R1B, but RA, not so much.
It works exactly the same way as the senior bylaw. You have the same base densities, 4321. You have the percentages, which you add up, and you take the percentages and multiply them by the.
But I can only build 2.5 units an acre in RA. I can build 4 now under the senior housing bylaw. Am I wrong?
No.
You're correct.
What is senior housing for R1A and R1B? I don't have it in front of me.
4.
4 on all of them?
4.
Well, it
You know,
has a maximum, yeah.
Up to 4,
Yeah, here's a thought. Instead of going at it the way we've been going at it, query whether or not we should do what the senior housing bylaw has done, and that is formulate a maximum density per developable acre. And the densities for the senior housing bylaw are 6 for the business district and 4 for the other districts.
Right. So the other question.
So think about that. I mean, instead of working forward, work backwards. What is the maximum density we would want to see?
Well, yeah. And that's how we started this conversation 4 months ago is what was the maximum density that we thought was permissible, allowable, acceptable, doable, financially, politically, and otherwise. What is that density? And so
the range, first of all, the ranges in my column G, ranges from 4 to 10, 6, 4, and down to 2.5, are right in the same range as the senior housing in column J, 6, 4, 4, 4. Just a little more sliding. Okay, but it's the same ballpark density. Okay, and all that this is doing is it's giving a little more bonus for the set aside because we're not. This is called flexible zoning to encourage open space. It's not senior housing, and it slides a little more as you move from B down to RA. But it's not really.
So real quick, just to clarify, because in the senior housing bylaws per developable acre, not counting the set aside, right? Not counting the, oh no, I'm sorry.
No, it's the, it's
the whole- yeah.
it's on
Anything
the
but- anything
original
but wet-
land. It's
Anything
the,
but
it's,
wetlands.
it's units on the original per acre on the original land.
Yeah. Okay. That's what this is.
And that's exactly what this is.
Yeah. Right.
It's units per acre on the original land.
You know, I kind of like, you know, and it's, call me Mr. Bias here, is our original matrix was very easy to understand. One could read it and they could see a progression of density based on doing something that we thought was reasonable and beneficial to the town. And we got to a maximum density of 7 units per acre, 6 in the first 2 zoning districts and 7 in the last 2. Maybe that number is too high. Maybe it should be 5 units. Maybe it should be 4. I don't know what that number is. But at
But
least
you also assume that it should be the same in all parts of town. As if there was one universal constant for what you know, land use should look like. And I'm saying, well, you know, it may depend on what's already there a little bit.
Right, but here's the thing: senior housing has been around. It passed with the densities that are listed, right? And they were all, other than the business district, they were all equal. Now, whether these days that makes sense politically, I don't know. Where everything is treated somewhat equal. Some people aren't going to like it, but does the majority want that? Do they want? Some people would say the opposite. Well, maybe you put more density out in the RA because there's your downtown's already built up. But in the end, equality may come into play for most people, right? And it already has through senior housing.
I would take the point of view of property rights, which is people bought into this town in RA and R1A and R1B districts because it looked a certain way and had a certain density and character. Okay. And if you go and, make enormous changes in that character, in that landscape, by changing the zoning law, allowing all sorts of density, I think those people would have a legal case. I think they would, I'm not sure about that. They're going to be very, very upset. That's not what I moved here for. You just pulled the rug out from under us.
That's all very true.
And the point is that if you make small changes in the density, that's more tolerable than if you make enormous changes in the density.
Of course, but
So I'm trying to grade this.
no, I understand.
That's not as much of an issue.
That argument's more, in my opinion, more towards if you were changing the zoning, the base zoning in town, let's say, right? Obviously, that's different than what we're doing.
But that's what flexible zoning is. It's saying we're moving to a system where there is no one, limit, where you have a range for each area.
No, it's a special permit though.
right, you're not changing the underlying density. You are allowing the potential for a higher level of density if the developer meets specific criteria. We've tested the senior housing bylaw twice, and it's worked quite well to the benefit of the Affordable Housing Trust and the town's tax base. And it's not costing the town any more to service those units. We have 4 units per acre, and suddenly, we're going to 6 units in the R1A. People are going to go ballistic if they see 6 units in the R1A. I mean, and then.
Well, but it was 6 units in yours.
Huh?
It was 6 units in your proposal.
Right.
That was the
But
maximum for R1A.
I always said that number is whatever people feel comfortable with.
But we can adjust these numbers the same way. I mean,
Again,
this is not this is, I mean, I have these 25%. We can change the 25% and lower it from, you know, the $5.99 down to $4.99. We can fiddle with the math. We can put a cap on the bonus you get for setting aside land, because nobody's going to actually set aside 99% of their land. That's just to make the math work.
Why not use the same matrix that the senior housing bylaw uses?
It does.
Why make a new one?
This is exactly the same. It came directly from the senior housing bylaw.
But
Well, it's just
are the
different.
numbers the
Well,
same?
it does, except you added the buying, you had to buy in the base, you have to
Right.
buy the base density.
Yeah, but that's
Because
easy.
I thought that was the main main argument that we had from the one developer we interviewed was, you know, I'd rather not have to, you know, I think I know what will sell in this market, the developer was saying, and I think I know what people want, and I would love to build more of that and at a little higher densities, but if you start telling me what I can and can't build, then, you know, I'm gonna go away. And well, I'd happily
Well-
make a contribution. I'd happily make a contribution
Yeah,
to give
but
a little extra density.
you're talking to a developer that doesn't do high density housing. He builds single family homes. So I wouldn't
Well, let's show it to somebody else.
that he's a particularly reliable. But I like Marnie's suggestion is this whole thing is about picking density. What is the level of density that we think is acceptable? And then moving backwards to figure out the incentives that get us to that level of density.
What do you mean by acceptable? People bought into this town in various places.
Please stop.
No, because they thought that was the density that they wanted. That was acceptable density.
Guess what? Things have changed. We passed a senior housing bylaw 15 years ago. It's been used successfully. It's working. It's doing exactly what was intended. So, and the town hasn't, you know, turned into something horrible. It has changed, but our only resource in this town is our land. And so we need to use that resource very carefully, thoughtfully, and a way that's going to provide housing, protect open space, and generate revenue for the town. I think three things that we can all agree on. It's going to happen somewhere in town. We want to have some guidance and direction as to how that happens and where it happens, so that people understand when they see this, what it means, what's the formula, how it works, and what's the potential impact. Simplicity is key here. We're not going back in time, Bill. People bought into this town and it changed. When I bought it, my house with 20 acres of open land, there are now 5 houses where there was 20 acres of open land. I had a riding ring behind my house. I looked out my picture window in the rear of my house, I could see a riding ring. There's a house now there. It changed. That's what happens in this town. So it's coming. We can't fight it. So let's do it intelligently, thoughtfully, and carefully, and use the senior housing as a template, at least for the kind of density that we know people accept already. Can we push that envelope? I don't know. We'll find out. But I'd like to see if we can do something that provides the flexible options that gives developers a chance to come back to us and say, hey, here's a piece of land I can preserve 40% of it, 50%, 60%, and do cluster housing that, you know, provides some smaller units, that is energy efficient, that connects trails. They can kick in whatever number, $50,000, $100,000 for an extra unit. So I think we just got to.
I mean, the plan that is coming before us for Essex Street is 60 acres and 55 units. They don't need anything at all. All they're doing is clustering them. They're at about 1 unit per acre for the total package, even though they're only building on 40% of the acreage. that's, that rocky ledge and not the low marshy land. But
And they're
they're
using-
building what they want to build. All they really needed, they didn't need all the bonuses and other things. They're well within the current zoning. I don't think it's actually R1B there. It's not, it's
R1.
R1A, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yes, R1A.
It's
No,
R1A. They don't need any zoning bonuses. They wanted, and they had a great plan for, being well within the current zoning, just clustering things and leaving a large amount of open space.
Now, there's a number of wetland acres there, right, Patrick, that don't count into that.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think he's going to be excising off the farm as well.
Yeah, but he's within half an acre zoning just on the ledge that he's in. Plus
It's
only
one.
about half of
It's
the
R1.
field
It's
wetland.
R1B. So yeah.
I don't think he actually needs, he needs the ability to cluster units, but I don't think he's actually going over the density that's currently there. It's very
So,
close.
so I'm just curious, Corey, I haven't heard anything from you. Dan, you've been quiet as well. Be helpful if you guys weighed in and sort of helped us resolve this, or at least weigh in and help us provide some guidance.
Sure. For one thing, I mean, I'm in the camp that I think that the chart is as clear as a chart gets in these matters. It's not something you speed through and understand perfectly at the end. I think you kind of take your time column by column and do your math. And I think you arrive at what it is. So in terms of clarity and clarity alone, I think that this is as clear as we've wanted it to be. But I do agree that, some of the base densities, they're not base densities, but the resultant densities are a little bit low in the RA and a little bit high in the R1A, especially given the fact that you only arrive at the 2.5 when you've donated 99% of your land to open space. So it takes a very extreme amount of land being left to open space to get a very not extreme increase in density. And so I would personally like to see some leveling off of the three groups. I don't know enough about RB, or rather B, to say if that's too much or too little, but certainly looking at the three we've paid attention to, R1A, R1B, and RA, they're maybe too far apart for my take.
It's a good point, Corey.
Dan?
I understand what you're saying. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I do think the chart is readable, but I do agree that the densities in the RA should be higher. That it should be, there should be a bigger increase in some of those other zones. But I don't know how to do that.
Well, I think you have to start off with a higher base.
You could do that if you made the 1 a 2.
Right.
Then everything over in column G would be 2, 2.5, 3.5. Not that different than R1B.
Right.
I would do.
So, question, and again, I want to get back to where Marnie was going with the densities. So in the R1A, which is currently a 20,000 square foot lots, allows 1 unit. And that's primarily downtown, outside the business district. So would people feel comfortable with 6 units an acre in the downtown?
What are the townhouses, Brian, near you?
7 per acre.
7 per acre?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of units across the street. There's a 3-unit on a 10,000 square foot lot. It's
Yeah,
old.
we just did
What's it?
18 units on an acre in the business district.
So any other comment?
No, I mean, the one comment I was gonna have, just like in senior housing, I think to get this through, especially if we up some of these densities, we need to cap the total number of units
In a development.
Per development.
in a development and in the town, at least at first. That's what we did at senior housing. That I think was, I mean, again, it was slightly before my time, I think, but that was one reason it was able to be passed.
We could do the same
how
thing.
long
We could
does
say
that-
the total number of units or total per year or whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
That can be granted with this part of the zoning bylaw is 100 units or whatever it is.
Whatever we decide the number. Yeah.
We could also put a cap on the share of land, which will help slide it down, the share of land left open. Cap that at 75%,
Yeah.
something instead of, so we don't get this 99 thing.
So there's also, so the question also is, should there be a minimum? This originally started out with 40% open space. Should there be a minimum open space before you can start applying this bylaw?
I'm not sure I'd want that because if there was some way that a guy could take, developer could take 20% of his land and, just make it valuable to the town, wouldn't want to say, no, that's not enough. If it's like, that's where the wetlands is, or that's where the rocky ledge is, you'd still say, no, what he gets is a smaller bonus, a much smaller bonus, but I'm not sure it needs to have a cap so you can't give away all the land. I mean, it's sort of nonsensical, but I'm not sure I'd have a minimum.
Okay. So I just wanted to keep going down. So people on getting the people in the R1A, the 20,000 square foot lot are okay with 6 units in theory, maximum 6 units per acre. Yes, no? Anybody doesn't like that?
I think it's fine.
I think it's fine also given the limited number of lots that are going to be looked at,
Yeah.
generally speaking.
Okay, so let's move on to the R1B, which is 40,000 square foot lot. Current zoning is you're allowed 1 unit. So under this proposal, you could buy for $50,000 another unit as your base, and you could get as high as 4 units.
I mean,
If you dedicate 99% of your land to open space.
well, so
Yeah.
that's the problem.
We're going to
adjust-
put a cap on that.
We have to
at
adjust it, but we
75%.
also have to make the math work so that if you do 75%, that's the cap. That's your 60, whatever we cap it at, that works out. In the
Yeah,
math.
that's the problem with these is in order to get to that maximum number, if I'm reading this correctly, is you, as Corey pointed out, you've got to reserve 99% of the land. Well, that's never going to happen.
Right, I know that. I said that at the beginning, so we could, what do you want to, you could certainly cap it at 75. I'm not sure I'd want to cap it at 50.
Right.
Because the guy on Essex Street, I think, has actually got more land he's restricting than developing. Is that true, Patrick?
What guy on Essex Street? Oh, the guy over, I know where you mean, never mind.
What parcel are you referring to, Bill?
The proposal for Meadowbrook.
So 133 Essex.
What share of land was he actually going to build on? It's 60 acres, but I think he was only going to build.
It's 31 acres, I think, is what he's building on.
Which
Yeah,
is
the
roughly
overall
50%.
parcel is 66 acres. He's doing 50 units.
So if it's 66 acres, then it would be 31 and 34, 35. So he's setting aside 35 and building on 31.
Yeah.
And he's building on 31, he's building 50 units. So that's lower density than he needs.
So,
That's
Bill.
less than two units per acre.
so Bill,
Well, but it's also the maximum number we allowed in any senior housing development.
Which
yeah,
is,
actually, I think the maximum is
Brian.
50, so we ought to check that.
Yeah, that is true. I did check that. The maximum number is 50 per project.
Right. So keep going. So Bill, so maybe you should try this at 70% or some number, or 60%, I
Right.
don't know. So that, because right now it's heavily skewed, is in order to get to 4 units in the R1B, you have to set aside 99% of the land. That's never gonna happen. So.
No, but if I say you can, there's a maximum of 75% set aside, then your maximum density would go to 3 3/4, which is, not that much different than 4.
So anyway, just for the understanding of this, I think you got to lower that to some
Right.
number, because people, again, makes it too confusing. And then, but let's assume that we get to, in the R1B, your maximum buildable density is 4 units an acre. That's the 40,000 square feet, where under current zoning, you can build 1 unit. Under this, you could get up to 4 units. So let's go to the R. So are people okay with 4 units
Per acre.
per acre maximum?
That's, I can go higher than that, but yeah, if you want 4 units per acre, that's fine. I'm on a 1/4 acre land where my house is, and this whole section here is roughly that same thing.
But that's
Yeah.
not what, but is your area zoned, Rick? Is your area zoned
I don't,
Yeah.
1/4 acre, or is it zoned 1 acre?
it's not zoned but probably zoned for 4 per acre. I don't
I
know.
think you're half acre there.
You think we're half acre? We're less than, we're at
Yeah.
less than
Well,
half
now,
an acre.
now you're half acre.
Yeah, we weren't when it was built. My house
Right.
was built in 59.
Yeah.
All right, so then let's go to the RA district. We're under the current numbers, if you set aside 99% of the land and you buy a base density unit of 1, you can get up to 2.5.
Well, right.
Personally speaking, that number should be at least 4, if not 5.
Well, you don't want it to go the reverse way. You want it to be the same as R1B, which it'll be very, very close to R1B if we just raise the base flexible housing density from 1 to 2.
Right.
Remember, the senior bylaw has it at 1.
So I'm just, okay, so let's try that. I mean, I'm not hearing anybody objecting to 4. I'm advocating, I would go for 5, because we certainly, that's where the land is that we want to preserve, is mostly in the RA. So,
But remember, just because you want to preserve land in RA, with this bylaw, it doesn't mean that's going to happen. Right? Because the developer can still say, my God, I can get 4 times as many units if I just chip in 50K for each of the extra units.
well, again, that's where this gets confusing.
He doesn't have to set aside land. He doesn't have to set aside land to be a part of this program. Now, we could make it that way. That's a different math. That's a more complicated math. If you can't even play in this arena unless you set aside land.
So, but I thought the $50,000, you got to buy 1 additional unit. Are you saying they should be able to use the $50,000 to buy unlimited number of units? Well, I'm a little confused with that. I thought that was
No,
the
you
number.
pay $50,000 for each of the units you buy.
So I thought the $50,000 was being applied to the base density. So you bought
No, the 50,000 is applied to the difference between the base density and what's allowed by law. So it's a per unit figure. So if we set that to 2
So
and the RA is 0.5, the difference is 1.5 times 50. It would go to 75,000. He'd have to make a contribution for
to get to
each
1
unit.
to get to 1 unit as the base density.
No, to get to 2 units if we made it 2.
Yeah, see, this is where I get confused because I thought I understood this. I
Well, we
thought-
were
I
talking about
thought-
changing the numbers.
Now, let me try and I'm trying to work through this, so just bear with me. So what I thought I understood originally was in column I, you use that 50,000 to buy up from the RA 0.5 units per acre to 1.
Right. That's
Is that
correct.
true?
That's correct.
Okay.
So if you buy it,
But-
to
but-
one-
but hold on. Don't derail me. So what I think you're telling me, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, is that I can then take $50,000 and buy additional units above and beyond the base that I've already bought. Is that true?
no, you
No.
can go from A to B and you pay a price of
Yeah.
50,000 per
Yeah.
unit.
Got it.
But you can't go above B unless you also are participating in C, E, and F.
I got that.
Or
And-
yeah.
But my maximum is if I set aside 99% of my land, I can get 2.5 units per acre.
That's right. And that's
Right.
going to cost you $100,000 per acre to get those extra 2.5, to get those extra 2 units.
How is it?
Because you're going from.
Hold on, that's what you already paid in B.
You already paid for it. You told me you
No,
paid
no, no,
to.
no.
I is always G minus A. So if you did nothing but get to B, then it's B minus A. But if you
That's
got all the way to G, then it's
Yes.
G minus A. So
But remember, G is just the sum of B plus B times C, E, and F.
I know. So if I use B, C, E, and F, my maximum density G in the RA district is 2.5. If I set
2.5,
aside
that's right.
99% of the land.
Currently, yes.
That's right. That's 2.5.
But
I got that.
we're suggesting the base density in column B in the RA district be 2.
Right. So that changes everything. And we're also suggesting that we don't go 99%, we cap it at 75%.
So what does that yield for a maximum density when all,
Then the 3 numbers in RA will become, okay? They will become 2, 2.5, and 3.5. If we made those 2 changes. And then you have to change the number in J. Okay,
Don't worry about J. Don't worry about J.
that would be 100. 1.5. That would be 75 to 350.
so the maximum you could get if you set aside using your new limit of 70% of the land and using C and E and having bought the base density up to 1, now 2, excuse me.
That
You
would
could-
be 3.5.
You could get 3.5.
But not to confuse things more, nobody's going to put a 1,500 square foot unit on a quarter acre or half acre or a third acre lot either.
I don't think developers are gonna, that's right. I don't think developers are gonna use this. I thought about putting
Where?
something in
Where?
about affordable units. But I think we should pause on the whole affordable unit thing for the town until we see what happens with Gordon Conwell. That's a game changer for the entire town.
We're not, we don't include affordability in here. That's a bylaw that already exists.
That's right. Okay.
So, Dan, your point was that developers won't build in B and R1A. Is that what you're saying?
No, in RA, they're not going to put a 1,500 square foot unit.
Oh, yeah. No, they're going to put, a 2,000, 2,500,
Right.
3,000
So they're
square
not going
foot.
to get that bonus either.
Well,
So,
that would allow them, I mean, actually, it's kind of an interesting hypothetical. With a density of 3.5, right? They could make a triplex unit or 7 units on a bigger piece of land, but they can make a triplex unit, each of which had 1,500 square feet and come in under the higher density. But it would still be, you're right, it would still be on, you'd be putting those 3 units on 1 acre.
Acre.
Yeah. In an RA district.
so
You wouldn't put them as 3 individual units, little tiny units, each on a third of an acre. You'd be putting them probably as a bigger triplex of some kind on a 1 acre. I mean, I think that's what the developer would say. That would be a better
so I
thing
think
than making 3 little tiny units. Or maybe they could be like townhouses. They could be attached common wall.
That you'd have to at that,
Yeah,
just to save on wall space and windows and everything, you'd have to do that.
yeah.
So I think you've got to go to it, and maybe we do what Wenham does, is that you round up so that becomes 4. The 3.5 becomes 4. So there's at least some consistency between R1B and RA.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill, I would suggest if you this does need work, so I would suggest moving column I and either building that into B so that, or make that C or something and say your beginning base density in this district is whatever that number is, so that people understand what you're starting with under current zoning. And then that next column says for 50,000 or whatever that number is, you can buy an additional unit. So people go, okay, it's additive. Now I understand I've got, I've got an additional unit, whatever that number is. Went from 1 to 2 because I paid 50,000. Then apply the other incentives that are in your C, E, and F, so that there's a cumulative process. As you read across, you can understand it, because having I on the other side of the page and saying, well, it really applies to B is a tough read.
You actually don't even have to have that as a column. The $50,000 is an application fee. It's just a fee. That's all it is. It's
Okay.
almost meaningless.
It's a
You come to
fee.
town hall with a $50,000 check for your flexible development bylaw. It's
It's
just
per unit. It's per unit that you're getting.
Per unit. It's not a flat fee.
per unit.
Whatever, but you get my gist, Bill.
Yeah, I can see. I can move that over next to column B and then have JB. And in J, I'll just have, what would the fee be if you did the maximum?
Or it's just a footnote, or a, whatever you want to call it, an asterisk, whatever you want.
So,
That's what it costs to do this.
And I would get rid of the current smart growth, because that's kind of passé now. So we should decide, do we want to put in the advanced water and energy efficiency or public access, connection improvement of adjoining trails? I don't know, whatever people feel is the
Well,
most.
I would modify column F to include more about where possible, connecting to trails and, making sure there's public access.
Yeah, where possible, I think is
Right. I can do that too.
or that's a footnote.
All right. So how about this is put in advanced water and energy efficiency standards,
Okay.
the smart growth. So we'll have something that hopefully is readable and understandable and applicable. So what's going to be helpful here is then running a couple of examples, so that people can, because this is going to be necessary to sell this document. So, and it certainly would help the general understanding. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, just like in senior housing, should we have the one column be the maximum,
Absolutely.
per acre?
I think that's really helpful.
Well, that's actually the second number in column G.
You're right. It is. It is.
But it's not, again, it's not,
But if you round up,
it doesn't say
Yeah.
that. It doesn't say that.
Yeah,
So
you wouldn't
it's-
know that without being told it.
Right. So it looks like we've got another iteration
Okay,
coming.
all right,
So-
all right, all right, all right, all
pretty
right.
straightforward. Though.
So
We have all winter. We're not going to get vaccinated. We'll have to stay inside for winter. So
I just want to add,
we can go another couple iterations. This town meeting's not till April, whatever.
so question, just an overall question, assuming we get this and it stays in its current form and densities, what's the, this is a question I have, I'm not asking it because I know the answer, is we'll have the senior housing bylaw, and then in theory, the flexible development bylaw.
And they have the same table. They look they just have different objectives, but they,
And essentially, other than the business district and R1A, it'll have the same maximum densities. So my question is, why would they pick this over the senior housing bylaw? And that's a rhetorical question. I don't know the answer.
because all of a sudden there are no more seniors. This whole senior thing is driven by demographics. And
Well, this is
everybody who's buying into the senior housing that's being constructed around here is not from Hamilton, not satisfying local demand. It's a lot of people think, oh, this is really nice senior housing. I want a place in the country that I don't have to maintain.
Well, the way I look at it is it allows you to do more or less whatever you want, any type of housing that you want, and still get that same density as what senior housing has, where you're not restricted to that. You can build senior on part of it. You can build apartments on part of it. You can build cottages on part of it. You can do whatever you want up to a certain, maximum density. That's the benefit.
Okay.
That's right. Where the answer is it looks an awful lot like senior housing without the seniors.
Yeah.
Right.
It
Just
doesn't
keep
have
this
that
growing past. Didn't we say that there's a cap on the number of senior units in the town? So
Yeah.
that's sort of effectively the end of that bylaw.
Right.
Well, unless you lift the limit.
But this gives us
But
flexibility to
the
keep going.
town finance
Otherwise-
committee will quite rightly say, well, the senior bylaw creates houses, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 that pay for themselves because they have no kids in the school. But if you get rid of the senior, then you're going to have a problem, which is, houses that don't pay for themselves because people will move in there with kids.
That's another myth.
That's a good segue, but let's
I mean,
let's just recap. Bill, you're gonna modify this.
yep. I mean, I've taken notes here.
Yeah.
I
I think
think
it's pretty straightforward now.
you need to do it landscape, Bill.
What's that?
If you
Landscape.
do it in a landscape format, so there's more room for you to work with.
Well, but we're getting rid of columns now, so
Yeah,
Well-
we're shrinking it. It's going to look just like page 63.
Yeah.
Actually, it'd be great if you could make columns C, E, and F so they're wider and the words are on a vertical rather than on a,
Yep.
So they're readable. It's easy to do, believe me. The idea is to make it readable and simple. Not, so
Right.
yeah,
Let's make it readable, simple. Do the columns like we talked about. Do any footnotes that we talked about. Get that in there because I want this next time. And we're meeting in 2 weeks, right, Patrick?
Yes.
Okay. Next time, I want essentially if we say final draft that we can send out with this and then all the text to developers for comment. They can chew on it over Christmas and New Year's and whatever, and then we'll talk about it in late January or February. Or whatever our meeting is, mid to late January. That's essentially a month for people to think about it. Is that long enough?
If you
Sure,
give them
why
longer,
not?
they'll take it. So yes, it's long enough.
We want to couch this as a flexible cluster bylaw, because that's what we're really doing here. We're allowing people to cluster and not just build at high density.
You can
They
do
have
what
to-
you want.
What?
Why even call it that?
Okay,
I mean, again, I think
that's what it's doing.
cluster
in
to
effect.
me means a certain thing and means different things to different people. I guess I'd rather have this be more open.
Okay,
What you can and can't do, or what you can do. Just my take on that.
Yeah, I agree, because it can end up being a cluster
Yeah.
without calling it a cluster.
Right. I mean, it's just like OSFPD. That was cluster, but we didn't call it cluster. And that's what this is replacing. All right. We good on that? Anything else? Okay.
okay, another iteration.
Yep. So, Patrick, that little segue that I mentioned into the whole kids in the school system and new houses and stuff, you sent around today kind of the culmination of a little study that you had done or did that looked at over the last 5 or 6 years, new houses that have been built in town and then the number of school age kids that have gone in them. Can you just kind of bring us up to date there?
Yeah, I did send that out this afternoon. Bill did tell me that he had some information that may be a little bit different than mine, that he and I should coordinate our information before we get into it beyond ankle deep. But in any event, what I did find was during that 5-year period, we basically had 14 students within the new 26 units that were built during that 5-year time frame, which basically equated to 0.34. Is that right? About 0.34, 38 rather, students per each residential unit, which I think that's substantially less than what people were thinking.
Right. And you left out all the senior housing that was built out of that
Yeah.
number.
I called that out entirely
Yep.
since that didn't really fit the growth parameters. We really were looking for enrollment, and within senior housing, it's age restricted. So we're certainly not going to have any enrollees there.
So basically, the 14 units that had new students are on that sheet with, those are all brand new houses in that period of time, correct, Patrick?
Well, no, actually, there were 26 units. And within those 26 units, there were 14 students that were resulting from that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right.
We did find that there's actually some in-town movement.
Yeah, you got 4 of those.
It's not surprising. People, as their family grows, they move in the community where the kids are already in school. They find accommodations that better fit their family needs. So I assume that was what took place with that group of 4.
Yep.
But as I
it's just-
say, Bill and I'll look at his numbers and my numbers. I'll check with the assessor to make sure.
Yeah, there was a little inconsistency between what the assessor says the new units are and what Patrick got from the Board of Education.
What do you, roughly what would the inconsistency be? 2 students, 4 students, or a lot of students? What do you have for an inconsistency, Bill?
there's a question of which units. So the assessor gives me a file of all the units in town, single family units by year built. And she actually says there's like 26 or 25 units built since 2015, but they all have different addresses than the units that Patrick got. I don't know what the cause of that is. I mean, I looked at some of what
All have different addresses.
there's almost no overlap. And I just don't know what we have to rethink this, how it's being done. I mean, the assessor's data is pretty straightforward. We'll work it out.
It doesn't make sense because I looked at those today because Patrick had a question about the 4 kids because I had mentioned that in the last go around that he sent to at least me, that listed them out, and I said, well, I know a couple of them, and I know that they moved from town to a new house, and so I went and looked at it. No, I didn't look at all of them today, but I went into the assessor's database and with those certain addresses, and they were right. And they,
well, I looked at an address right near our old street where three kids came into the school system, and the house was built in 1930.
Right.
In the assessor's file, it's supposed to be new built houses, not new moves in, newly built houses.
Right. Oh, you're saying so on the list that Patrick had, there was a house there that was built in 1930.
A lot of them. Or a lot of houses not built is supposedly in the 2015 to current window.
Okay. What's the difference between the
Well,
19 houses that are on one sheet and then the houses that are broken down?
Guys, why don't we let Patrick and I, kibitz on this and go back to the data and see what's going on.
Yeah.
And not do it in a public meeting. I mean, it's kind of like.
Yeah, we don't need to get into specific addresses, but I'm part of the issue, I'm sure, is tear down. Somebody tore down a house that was built in 1930 and built a house in 16. Right? I mean,
but then the assessor's record would have that.
They would have the new house.
They would have the new house, not the one that was torn down.
Correct. I mean, if they look back far enough, they could obviously have it, but that's probably.
Yeah, but the current file has, right.
Yeah, but I need to come back to my question. I got two sheets here, one that has 19 houses on it and another that's got 1, 2, 3, 4, about 26 units into about 5 different blocks. What's the difference between these 2 sheets?
Let's see. On the 2 sheets there, the one where I totaled up 26 units.
Right.
This is what I got verbatim from the assessor's department.
Okay.
What I did is you look at those different categories as you go down vertically on the column to your right. That's beginning with 2015.
Yeah.
You'll see several of those are senior housing units.
Right.
I've nixed those out. Those were not counted. The 5 that you see above that, and then you drop down to the 9 lower, then
right.
3, then 5, then 4. Those are units that are regular units, not age restricted, not senior housing.
Okay.
So
yeah.
That was the assessor's information I got that showed me there were 26 regular residential units that were constructed during that growth period of 5 years.
Okay.
So then I took that 26 units and then I looked at the following 2 sheets. And as Brian and I mentioned earlier, that last sheet, you'll see that we've marked out at 223 and let's see, 219 Asbury. There were children that moved from other locations in Hamilton. So that ended up reducing that 19 student number down to 14.
Okay,
So that was the math that allowed me to divide those 26 units by 14 to give you that 0.38 student per new unit.
okay.
Sound reasonable?
I guess so. I've got to think about it a bit. I'm a little bit confused, but
So no, the first page is all just units built from 15 on,
okay,
taking out the senior. That's 26 total.
okay, right.
The next sheet was only kids that were enrolled in the system that moved into some of those houses.
Okay,
That's the
all
difference,
right,
right?
got it.
Now, out of those 19 kids, like Patrick said, a number of them moved within town. They were already in the system, so you can't really count them as being added to the system for a new house. It was-
Sure.
So that's all it is.
Okay. Okay, so these are the same properties, just two different lists set up two different ways.
Right. Well,
essentially.
the second one is just school enrollment in some of those houses.
Right. Thank you.
All right. So we did not get minutes from last meeting. Am I correct?
Yeah, I've checked my email and I don't think I sent that out.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I don't remember seeing it.
Okay. Any other updates or reports, Patrick?
I did want to ask the board to consider whether or not you want to think about changing that numeric cap on the 100 senior housing units as per the senior housing bylaw. That might be something that you want to consider for Springtown meeting. So I wanted to put that out there with you.
Yeah, because we'll be up to what, 80, potentially 80 something.
85,
That includes Essex Street.
yes, sir.
It would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be 85 total, which would leave 15 units beyond that to reach the cap.
What do we propose?
number
Like
do you think would be-
500?
Patrick, have you verified that that's the actual number in the bylaw?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
What number do you think would be a good number to go to, Patrick? Do you have any ideas or suggestions?
Get rid of it.
I think that we could look at it in any number of ways. We could say X number per year. We could give a complete cap. I suspect that to townspeople, knowing that there's a desire to sort of hold growth in check, that maybe if we ask for another 100 to then cap it at 200, and if there was a need at some future date, we'd go back again to the town meeting
Yeah,
members.
because it's taken us 10 years to, get, 35 or whatever we have right now.
Sure.
So those numbers would not include people like myself who are seniors, who are staying in the house we've owned for 40 years or 50 years or so.
No, it's only for new developments. We're not talking about.
Yeah, okay. Never mind. Wrong idea.
Yeah, we're capping the number of seniors in town. You're out of here.
You better be careful,
Yeah.
Rick.
Gotta move.
They're going to reject you from town.
Wait a minute.
I'm out.
Oh, God, Rick, that includes you too?
We get to handpick the 200 that get to stay. How's that?
Okay.
You have to pay $50,000 to stay.
I'm out.
No, but no, you're right. We should look at that, and we don't, not that anything, will happen immediately. If something happens on 6th Street and that happens to go through, there's a 15 left, but you're right. We should look ahead and have that ready just in case.
Hang on just
I
a
would suggest separating that from the flexible housing development bylaw.
Yeah,
The
that's probably-
the two do not come up at the same town meeting.
Right.
I think this one is actually the more urgent one, because if we got a
Got to go for
proposal
a minute.
for, let's say, 30 more senior housing units, the only way we could, and they look terrific, the only way we can do that is to wait till the next town meeting and then change the cap then, and that's going to put the developer off for an entire year, and we'll probably scuttle it. So getting that cap raised as,
I agree.
preemptively as soon as possible is probably pretty important.
I agree. It's something that's already demonstrated its success and shouldn't be too difficult.
Well, you could also argue that if we get this, well, again, the chances of getting this one passed the first time is probably slim, but let's say, that you can do the same thing you can in senior housing with this one, the flexible, right? You could build all
Yeah.
senior with this one and have essentially the same outcome.
But there's proof of product in senior housing, so I think that's probably a much easier sell at this
Oh,
point.
no, I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it's not.
It's just timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another matter, Rick, do you want to report on the Gordon Conwell meeting that we had on Monday?
Must I?
Give us
Yes.
the Reader's Digest version.
Okay, so Dave Thompson, Patrick, myself,
David
Oh.
Smith,
David Smith, thank you, and
Welcome.
Jamie Knudsen by phone were at this meeting. It's the first time the group, Gordon Theological Seminary Group Task Force had met in a year. So it was an update on the various issues, a couple of key issues, infrastructure. One is the town needs to do something about its water supply up there. It owns 2 acres. And something in the future is coming in terms of probably building a new water storage capacity at that site. The other issue, and we decided, is that we need to request and have a meeting with the leadership to find out what the story is with their sale of the 210 residential units that they have on site that they're proposing or discussed with us back in July that they were hoping to sell to a developer to turn into market rate housing. And they had represented that at least 25% of those were going to be affordable. And if that was the case, then all of the units, the 210 units, would count for the town's housing inventory, which would pass or get us above our 40B requirement. We haven't heard anything. There's been no discussions since, so I don't know, Dave talked to them or the meeting that they had with them, I think sometime in the spring. So we'd like an update to know what's going on. That was it.
This
So
was just,
hopefully-
this meeting didn't have any Gordon people.
No, this was just, there were 2 new members in committee, myself and Jamie Knudsen, who's a selectman. So it was really just get the group back together and update us as to what had gone on. Dave Thompson is very strongly, pushing for some kind of, remuneration for all the students. We have been educating some 30 to 40 students. I don't know if that's still the case, but the last 30 years with little no remuneration from the college. So, and the fact is that if they do sell off the property and it becomes market rate housing, it'll be added into the town's tax base, which would be a significant contribution in terms of tax revenue to the town, as well as affordable housing. And we haven't heard anything, and they've been at this for better part of a year. And when we can do Willow Street and get it going in 6 months,
Well,
it's kind of like, hey guys, what's taking the time? We'd like to know what's going on. And so that's what this meeting in January.
Remember, this campus of Gordon Conwell is just one of 4 around the world.
Yeah.
It's part of a
Yeah.
bigger empire, and I'm sure the empire is trying to think about what to do with theological education in general. And
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They're trying to sell off the 20 acres that we gave them an A&R for. As I understand it, they're coming back for another A&R because they want whoever bought it wants to do 4 or 5 separate plots of land within that 20 acres. Is that true, Patrick?
Actually, I checked today. I got a new concept plan from their engineers. They have it up to 9 lots now. So they're taking that 20 acres and cutting that up into 9 different lots in that A&R.
Okay.
So they're
okay,
basically
so
a
that's
little more than
9.
2 acres
They
a lot.
intend to build 9 units on that.
That's
guess
what I would assume it would be the case.
Okay.
Where is this land?
It's the hill that's off of
Bridge
That's
Street.
Bridge
correct.
Street.
Bridge Street and Miles River, essentially that corner going down Bridge.
Okay. I think I know where it is. Yeah.
It's the hill that
Thank
goes up to the campus.
Oh,
It's,
Browns Hill or something like
There's gonna be
that.
some steep driveways.
yeah,
Yeah.
it would
Yeah,
be,
the hill is very steep in parts.
yeah, it's going to
Yeah.
be good luck.
That's right.
So that's pretty much
So,
it.
so
So
real quick, was Dave suggesting, let's say if this sale happens of all these units and, the town gets, the affordable stock, it gets, tax revenue, is he saying that the college owes us more than that, given all the kids we've educated, or is with that kind of?
well, I think he recognizes, he said that was his whole reason for getting becoming a member of this task force, because he was very concerned about the fact that we had given up a lot of revenue and educated the kids. So this is the kind of he also recognizes that they're in financial difficulties. So we're not going to get money out of them for their
Right.
kids.
There's no way in hell they have any money, cash to give.
Right. So this is the next thing that comes if we can get this and kill 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of tax revenue and affordable housing. That would be a nice compensation. But they seem to be, and I'm speaking for myself, this seems to be taking an inordinate amount of time to. According to Dave, they're down to 1 developer. So, but the question is, where are they? What's happening? What's the configuration? And I think, certainly Dave and I we're adamant about we need to have a meeting and get some solid answers about what's going
Right.
on.
The real critical issue in terms of affordable housing is whether the developer elects to go with rental housing, because that could mean that all the housing would be on the SHI.
Right.
If it's sales, then it's a different story. We would still benefit immeasurably, but not to the extent that we would if
No,
it
I don't
were
think
rental housing.
Having been there when some of those units were constructed, because they were across the street from where we used to live, I don't
Yep.
think that's really amenable for a condominium, condominiumization. The halls are not private. You would have trouble
It
converting.
sounds like you would have to gut the whole building and just rebuild out.
No,
When we had our call with them, they specifically said rental.
rental. Right. When we met
That's the
with
thing that
them,
makes sense.
right. When we met with them in July, we, as in the planning board, they said rental housing.
And one of the reasons for that is that they want to have units available for their students that are there on campus, so they can rent from the new ownership.
Right.
Okay,
All right.
good.
Another topic, just to make the planning board aware, as Marnie can attest, that Habitat for Humanity of the North Shore have been pursuing a 40B project at 434 Asbury Street.
Yep.
They have prepared a submittal that is now in its process of being evaluated by DHCD. They have not submitted that formally to the town of Hamilton yet. When they do, that will go to the selectmen and the ZBA. The ZBA, as part of 40B law, send a courtesy review request of the project to the planning board, to the trust, to other boards and committees as part of the town government. But do expect that within probably the next couple months, I would think.
Where is that property? Is this land?
It's where the cell tower is. There-
Right, it's across from Canterbrook. It's almost across the street from Canterbrook. And it's a little over 4 acres. And just as an aside, Habitat for Humanity North Shore merged with Habitat for Humanity Merrimack Valley. And there's a new entity, it's Habitat for Humanity Essex County. And Don Preston was the executive director, but he is, he's still on the board of directors and involved in 434 Asbury, but there's a new director and she lives in Ipswich. So there's some activity there. But it's the property is where the cell tower is. You really can't see the cell tower from Asbury Street, but it's back there.
Yeah.
And
It's the same, is it same, they'd be using the same driveway that you used to get to the cell tower?
yes.
Okay,
yes.
I know where it is.
And there's a house back there. Apparently, it was once lived in by Mr. Mackerel's mother, but that house will be demolished.
Gotcha.
That house is vacant now, isn't it?
It is vacant, yes. And
Yeah.
Mr. Mackerel actually passed away.
So who owns the property now? His estate?
His estate, yeah. But I asked Don Preston at one point about that, and he said the estate as the successor would be bound by the purchase agreement that Habitat has with
Yeah.
had
that
with
makes-
Mr.
that makes
Mackerel.
sense.
Yeah.
So how much land will they be using there?
Well, it's a little over 4 acres, and they're planning 5 duplex type units. One part of the duplex would be 3-bedroom, and the other would be 1 handicapped accessible. But Mr. Preston gave me and Hunter Carroll, who's on the Affordable Housing Trust, a tour of the site, and there's a lot up in the air. They have to determine the location of the septic systems, and the configurations of the buildings may in fact change.
Right.
I mean, you can imagine that a handicapped individual may not want to share a party wall with a house full of kids. So they're aware of that issue. So how the ultimate configuration turns out is still up in the air. It's my understanding, Patrick, you're meeting with the DHCD at the site tomorrow. So maybe there can be a little more clarity on that. But I think the first order of business is to locate the septic system, and that property, it abuts part of Asbury Grove, but it also appears to be about the Great Swamp and the Audubon Society land. So it's not, I wouldn't say a horrendously difficult site, but they do have significant wetland on part of it. And even with our drought and whatnot, you could see that there was standing water, on one portion of the site. That would be like the southwest portion of the site.
Yeah, it's the river is back there.
Yeah, how, it's wet back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just, as an aside, I know Patrick sent around the revised draft that I had. I'm better with language than numbers. So I attempted to incorporate a lot of the senior housing bylaw language that would be applicable, but they're just so, you have it in the back of your mind. In the senior housing bylaw, there were various dimensional requirements and a table with dimensional standards. So I don't know if before this bylaw goes to developers for their comments, we want to quote unquote finish it, because there are certain questions that I raised both in a memo and in the document itself. So maybe we could focus on that a little bit at our next meeting, filling in the gaps, and also whether or not the planning board is comfortable incorporating chunks of the senior housing bylaw with respect to signage and administration and all that kind of stuff. So I just throw that out.
Okay. Thank you.
And it's sort of a decision
For all your work.
whether we want to have something more complete for the developers or just a matrix.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the basic language and, yeah, if we need, we need to have certain things in there about setbacks and so forth, but
Yeah, and that's a table with dimensional standards, and so
it's mainly the matrix though, I think, that's going to drive everything for them. But I'd like to have the whole thing at least